Hello, my friends, hello, and welcome once again to Stately Vaughan Manor. And today it's Wednesday, which means it's Epic Comic Book Wednesday. Every Wednesday, I'll talk about a certain graphic novel, comic book, or comic book subject. Steve Donoghue on his channel will talk about the same graphic novel, comic book, or comic book subject. It is our world's finest team up that we do once a week. And this week for Epic Comic Book Wednesday, we're going to be talking about an epic collection, about a comic book character you might have heard of. We're talking about Doctor Strange in this book. Doctor Strange, a separate reality. Doctor Strange, a separate reality. So this is the third volume of the Doctor Strange Epic Collections. It was actually the first Doctor Strange Epic collection that was printed. Epic collections are these big fat trade paperbacks that collect a big chunk of a character's comic book, but they are not very often published in chronological order, so they kind of jump around. That way they're not stuck in the 60s forever. But this was volume 3, and this has the stories from 1969 through 1974, so there's a pretty good chunk of Doctor Strange in here. Later on, they published volume 1, but they still have not published, for some reason, volume 2. And they really ought to publish that one, because there was a bunch of good stuff in there. Also because when you start this comic book, you start in kind of a weird place in Doctor Strange's history. When you first start reading this, you will notice something odd. This is Doctor Strange in the first story in this collection, and you'll notice he looks really weird. He's got this weird mask and gloves, and his costume's tweaked. And you're like, what the hell happened to Doctor Strange? Why does he look this way? Well, here's the thing. Back at the end, by the end of Doctor Strange's original run, he wasn't selling particularly well if you compared him to the other comic book superheroes that Marvel Comics was publishing. And so Stan Lee decided, you know what? To get Doctor Strange to sell better, maybe we ought to put him in a superhero costume. Yeah, we'll give him this weird mask and gloves and tweak him out a little bit so he looks like a superhero. Now, there's no reason why Doctor Strange would need a superhero outfit. He's a sorcerer. He's the Sorcerer Supreme. There's no reason Doctor Strange needs to wear a mask. Everybody knows who this guy is. But in order to help sales, let's put a mask on him, I guess. It didn't help sales, and it did not last very long. This was a very short-lived costume that he was in. But it's odd, and it's odd when you just pick this up expecting this guy from this awesome cover. You expect this guy in your comic book, and you get Doctor Strange looking all weird. So if you had volume 2 and you'd read that already, you'd know what was going on. But unfortunately, they haven't printed it yet. But you can get those stories if you're interested. Marvel did print this. This is the Omnibus Volume 2, Doctor Strange Omnibus Volume 2, which I got because I wanted the stories in here. Because this takes place after Steve Ditko leaves the book. And there was actually some really good stories, really good Doctor Strange stories that happened after that. And they're all in here, including his entire period looking like a superhero. And this is the first issue where he changes into his new ridiculous outfit. But like I said, the costume was not a hit. Nobody liked this costume, I don't think. And so it did not last very long. So in these initial stories, he shows up in this outfit. And the stories at the beginning of this volume are written by Roy Thomas, and they're pretty good. And the artwork, even though Doctor Strange is in a goofy outfit, the artwork is by Gene Colan, which is fantastic. Gene Colan is perfect for Doctor Strange, and he did some great work on Doctor Strange. And so these initial stories, which were the last stories before Doctor Strange's book was canceled, I mean, just some amazing, interesting artwork. Just some crazy, crazy otherworldly stuff. And yet, when it needs to take place in the real world, it looks really good. I'm trying to find some of that real world stuff. Here we go. Here's Doctor Strange just looking like a normal guy. And you'll notice that Gene Colan, he's one of those guys that when he writes, or when he draws, when he draws people, they do look like real human beings. So he can go to either extreme, as you can see right there, where he can draw realistic stuff and he can draw stuff that's just off the wall crazy. And Doctor Strange's book, I have to say, very often was just off the wall nuts. I mean, the weirdest stuff in a comic book that you want to see, it's going to be in a Doctor Strange comic book, particularly from this period. And that was from right from Steve Ditko on, and it just got weirder after Steve Ditko left. And great stuff in here by Roy Thomas and Colan. Unfortunately, the book was canceled before the story was finished that Roy Thomas was doing. So Roy Thomas had to move this story, instead of just, forgetting about it and leave Doctor Strange hanging. He moved the story onto a couple of books that Roy Thomas was also writing, including Submariner. So we have an issue of Submariner in here that takes place after the initial Doctor Strange series was canceled. And it's actually has some really good artwork by Marie Severin. I love Marie Severin. She's one of my favorite artists. And she's great on Submariner. And she's really good on Doctor Strange as well. So got a cool Submariner story with Doctor Strange. And then after that, we get a special treat for Steve Donoghue. We get an issue of the Hulk, illustrated by Steve Donoghue's very favorite artist, Herb Trimpe. Herb Trimpe, who was a master of comic book art. Here we go. Cool, weird stuff from Herb Trimpe. His run on the Hulk is actually very well remembered. People have a great affection, it seems, for his run on the Hulk. Steve Donoghue, not so much. But and I'm sure in his video he'll mention Herb Trimpe. But by the end of that Hulk story, Doctor Strange's story, or at least the story that began in his book, was complete. And so Doctor Strange was kind of, he was left without a book. And so he was gone for a while, sort of, until the Defenders showed up. The Defenders showed up with Doctor Strange. And so this has a story about Doctor Strange's return. And in this story, he gets his old costume back because his new costume was worn by Baron Mordo for a second, and he just ruined it. So Doctor Strange, when he shows up once again in Marvel Premiere, in this series of Marvel Premiere stories, which is in this Epic collection, looks like himself. So you've got this much of this book, him looking weird, and this much of this book, him looking like Doctor Strange. This is an interesting run of stories from Marvel Premiere. Most of these are written by Roy Thomas, I believe. I believe most of these are written by... No. I'm misremembering. Archie Goodwin did a lot of these stories, and then it went on to Gardner Fox, right? Yeah. And this initial Marvel Premiere story is really cool because it has Barry Windsor Smith, who had become very popular on Conan the Barbarian. Barry Windsor Smith, who kind of started off as a Jack Kirby clone, a weird Jack Kirby clone, developed an incredible art style on Conan the Barbarian. And his art is actually perfect for Doctor Strange. I kind of wish he did more Doctor Strange than he did, because his artwork is so weird that is perfect for the weirdness that you find in a Doctor Strange comic book, where Doctor Strange goes to other worlds and other dimensions. Here he is running into his old pal, or his old villain Nightmare. Great stuff in here from Barry Windsor Smith. Just excellent artwork. But the thing with the Marvel premiere run is that it seemed like every issue had a different artist. Barry Smith was around for a couple issues with Archie Goodwin. But then we switch over, and this is an excellent cover, by the way. I like that. But then we switch over to some different artists. And in Marvel Premiere number 5, you get an artist that I don't know. This was written by Gardner Fox, this story. Gardner Fox, a very famous comic book writer. I was surprised when I initially read these stories that I was getting Gardner Fox stories. Gardner Fox, who was popular for doing a bunch of DC stuff. And the artist is Irv Wesley. Who the hell is Irv Wesley, and why is his artwork such crap? So, Irv Wesley's art, I don't know who you are, Irv Wesley, but the artwork is pretty terrible in this one issue. It's not great. Even Don Perlin on the inks can't save. I mean, this is a hand, I think, right there. I think that's what... I don't know what's going on in this comic book, frankly. Poor Irv Wesley. So, the artwork for this one issue kind of blows. I'm sorry to say. The story is interesting, though. Gardner Fox was actually a pretty big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and he would sneak in H.P. Lovecraft references. He even snuck it into the Justice League. And so we get some really Lovecrafty stuff in these issues of Doctor Strange's Marvel premiere appearances. This is the Shambler from the Sea, you can see on this cover here. Now, the art changes to art by Frank Brunner and Sal Buscema, and boy, is that a relief after the last issue, because suddenly the art is pretty darn good again. And we get a great Lovecraftian story, a comic book version of a Lovecraft story. You get the Shambler there. That is about as Lovecraftian as you're going to get in a Marvel comic book. So it was fun that Gardner Fox was throwing all that stuff in there. So you get a really series of stories with the really pulpy horror feel. And it's always fun when Doctor Strange goes up against stuff like that. And so you have a series of stories that has that stuff in it. We got a Mike Ploog cover. That's weird. Got a Mike Ploog cover for Doctor Strange. Then we got Craig Russell with Esposito, Garciola, and Hunt on inks. So everybody in the world did inks on this particular Doctor Strange story. So they're really kind of shuffling around the artists on the Marvel premiere stuff. But the stories were fun. You've got one story there with pretty bad artwork. But most of the stories at this period are pretty fun, and they really lean hard into the supernatural horror aspects of this comic book. Which it would, because it was in the early 70s when these Marvel premiere stories were showing up. You get the artists continue to change. You've got Jim Starlin show up. Jim Starlin does some Doctor Strange stuff in here. Really cool Doctor Strange artwork. He's not the best Doctor Strange artist, but it's always fun to see him, and so it's fun to see these stories from him. Finally, towards the end of this run, we get to Doctor Strange getting into his own book. Got some more, and that's when Frank Brunner takes over the artwork, and Englehart does the story. So you've got Steve Englehart and Frank Brunner on the story and artwork by the end of this epic collection. And that's when we're moving into some really interesting stuff. And eventually he gets his own book back, right? Yeah, with this, finally by the end of this epic collection, this is the great cover that was reproduced on the cover of the epic collection. But this is Doctor Strange, Master of the Mystic Arts #1. So finally, after being in Marvel Premiere for a while, Doctor Strange gets his own book back, and the artwork is really good by Frank Brunner. I mean, look at that. That is really, really cool. Steve Englehart does some really good stories. More weird stuff, as you can see, but really cool stuff. Again, he's traveling to other worlds and other dimensions, just as he does in the best Doctor Strange stories. Like I said, the weirdest stuff you could think of, you'll find in the Doctor Strange comic book. I have not seen the new Doctor Strange movie. I saw the first Doctor Strange movie, which was good, but it wasn't this weird. I'm hoping the new Doctor Strange movie kind of cranks up the weirdness. I hear that it kind of does, but, you know, you never know. But the comic book, weird, weird stuff. And, yeah, this epic collection is rock solid, with some minor moments that aren't so great. But most of this is really, really good. And you get like a ton of artists in this. The Marvel Premiere stuff, literally every other book, every other story had a different artist. But most of them were good. So here you go. Doctor Strange, A Separate Reality. That was very rambly, as these Epic Comic Book Wednesdays tend to be. Okay, that's all I have to say about it, I promise. I will catch you next time. Be sure to tune in tomorrow for the Robert E. Howard Show. Robert E. Howard Show. Okay, guys, catch you later.